You've gotta see this.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
I'm Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. And that after video you saw took 120 hours, which is equivalent to about 30 minutes a day for 4 months. ChatGPT 5 just came out and is about to completely flip the script, making Spanish fluency faster, easier, and more natural than ever before. When I first got fluent, we didn't have this type of technology. But now everything is about to change, and here's how. So we're gonna go through 4 points, and if you make it to the end, then there's a free gift waiting for you. So when I think about any time an industry has ever been revolutionized, the first example I think of is when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone for the first time. And so before this point, when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, the phones that were prominent were basically like flip phones and like phones where there were buttons. So prior, phones almost looked like mini versions of computers where they had a screen and then there were buttons that sort of, controlled the screen. And you basically only had those options on the phone. You could call people and then there was like snake games. That's how phones were before. Now, when iPhone introduced the first touchscreen phone, it completely revolutionized the industry because compared to this old model, the iPhone was essentially just a screen so that you could see more, and it could have way more features, and it was like a handheld device. And so this completely revolutionized it because of one thing, which is leverage. Because if we think about the advantage the iPhone had compared to the previous phones, it was that the iPhone, it was basically like a handheld mini computer that you could have. And otherwise, what would otherwise take you to use a computer and boot up the computer and then actually use the computer, now using the iPhone would only take a few seconds and you could do it anywhere because it was handheld. And so that's why that whole industry changed, because of leverage. It's because, but with the old phone design, 1 unit of using that phone would maybe give you free outputs of something that you wanted. Whereas with the iPhone, because it was so much better, faster, and just easier to use because of touchscreen and all that, each second that you use that, you might be able to get, 30 times more value, especially compared to thinking about, let's say, computers. Computer, what do you have to do? You have to have a stationary place where you can have the computer. Then you have to turn it on. Then you have to type on a keyboard and then see it on the screen. And basically the previous phones were also like that. But now with iPhone, it was all higher leverage because you could do everything on the screen directly and there were different apps. And it was just so much faster because it was handheld. And so using this concept, let's talk about the second reason to why ChatGPT 5 will revolutionize Spanish learning in 2025. And it's for this exact same reason of leverage. ChatGPT 5 has insane leverage. Leverage is like the amount of input that you put in, you get way more of the output. And the more leverage you have, the more output you get. Okay? And so this video being on the internet has more leverage than if I just presented this presentation to a crowd of 20 people. That means the presentation only reached 20 people, whereas on the internet, it could reach 10 million people, 1 billion people. And so that's why, for example, social media has more leverage. And also why, that's another example of things that completely revolutionized the human experience, the internet. The reason why the internet completely revolutionized it was because it just made globalization way more accessible and everyone could access each other through something like the internet. So there was more leverage to meeting people on the internet rather than meeting people in real life. You could post a joke on Twitter and millions of people can see it. Whereas if you said a joke in real life, maybe 5 people heard it, right? And so it has more leverage and that's what revolutionized it. So here's why ChatGPT 5 has more leverage. Because now, instead of having to contact natives, you can talk to ChatGPT. Instead of being confused about a grammar concept, you can talk to ChatGPT. And so all of this has tons of leverage, okay? And that's why ChatGPT 5 will revolutionize this industry. Because the more advanced AI gets, the higher leverage this becomes. And so with the update of ChatGPT 5, this might have been 5 before. And now because of all the features and all the things that ChatGPT 5 has, this might have increased to 20 or something. And that's why ChatGPT 5 will revolutionize the Spanish learning industry. Because there's so much leverage. You can get so many things out of just 1 unit of effort rather than getting one thing out of 1 unit of effort, okay? You can ask 1 prompt and get answers to 20 of your questions. And that's the advantage of ChatGPT 5. So I'm not just going to leave it there. Now let's talk about how can we leverage ChatGPT 5? Because I mentioned a bunch of points of how we can leverage ChatGPT 5. How can you and I leverage ChatGPT 5 in order to actually learn Spanish faster? Because honestly, it will only do it if people act on it. I think that now there's going to be a lot more people acting on this. And so this is exactly how I would act on it and exactly how I am right now implementing ChatGPT 5 in my Spanish learning. Real quick before we move on, after years of developing these frameworks and over 100 hours of coaching, I've packed everything into one clear step-by-step program. So if you're serious about learning Spanish, then check the link in the description to join. Back to the video. So the way that we can leverage ChatGPT 5 in order to learn Spanish much faster is through a framework I like to call Spot and Speak. And so this is one of the exercises I use to get fluent in Spanish, and it was all based on what I like to call the fluency equation. A quick overview of my Spanish story is basically just, I saw YouTubers online get fluent in Spanish extremely quickly, and so I observed them and I found out that there is a formula for fluency. There are specific aspects of fluency that are actually important and other aspects that are much less important. And that led me to create what I like to call the fluency equation, which is speaking multiplied by understanding. And this made sense because the fluency equation is exactly what a conversation is. And my goal with fluency in Spanish was conversational fluency. My entire goal with learning Spanish was always just getting conversationally fluent, being able to walk into like a coffee shop and be able to just converse with natives. And so the only two aspects of language that is applied, that are used in a conversation, are speaking and understanding. Because in a conversation, it's I'm speaking and you're understanding me, and then we switch. So this is the fluency equation, and this is really the key to becoming fluent in Spanish, and exactly what I use to get fluent in Spanish in 120 hours of studying with just a few months, and also what other people have done who have gotten fluent in a few months. Fundamentally, anyone who ever got fluent has always done it through the fluency equation, because these parts of the language are the only things required for fluency. It's just that people focus on things that are outside of the fluency equation, which slow their progress down, which is also using leverage. And so the best exercise to get fluent in Spanish is to just have more conversation, because that is basically what we did when we learned our own native language. If you want to get better at a given thing, we simply have to practice more of that given thing. And there's two ways to do it. You can either practice the individual parts of that thing, or you can practice the entire thing. Now, I started by practicing the individual parts. So I started with the smallest part, which is speaking grammar and understanding grammar. And then I did understanding vocabulary and then speaking vocabulary. And so that is how I implemented the fluency equation. And with your own native language, it's more so a constant of all of these four. And so the way we're going to leverage ChatGPT 5 is by practicing conversations with ChatGPT 5. I find that this is the best leverage point that there is. So I use my conversations framework called Spot and Speak. And so I did this with real natives when I first got fluent, okay? But this is why AI is so revolutionary, because AI, now ChatGPT 5, is now permitting us to have conversations with ChatGPT 5 in Spanish. And so this is how the framework goes. The first is to spot. We're going to spot the areas of vocabulary that you're not comfortable in. So for example, if you struggle having conversations about business or cooking or telling the time, then you should write those topics down. The goal is to work on those topics. So basically, whatever topics that you have that you know you struggle with in terms of vocabulary, just working more on those. And I did this for a framework called transcript training, and I talk about this in other videos. But another way to do it is just to move on to the next step, which is to speak. All you do is to try to have conversations about those topics. You have now a list of topics that you know that you want to practice. Then speak more on those topics. Have more conversations about cooking, about business, about telling the time, about the weather. And suddenly you're going to get better at that, because you get better at what you do if you do more of it. You get better at swimming by swimming more. You know, Olympians, like people who are really, really good at their one small thing, usually it's not that they have some crazy new method that they have learned. And it's not that they're super duper smart or they're superhuman in some sort of way. Most of the time, like 99% of the time, they just do more. Like they literally just do the thing more. Like 99% of the times, if you see someone who's good at swimming, they probably have more hours in the water than you. And so the same concept applies. And so natives, fundamentally, the reason why natives are so good at having conversations about a variety of topics is because they've had conversations on every single one of those topics like hundreds of times. Imagine how many times a native has had small talk. Imagine how many times a native has talked about business. Like, right? Just like how you in English, you speaking English at a native level, you probably also have done that through English conversations. And so the goal here is just to have as many conversations as possible. And so I used to do this on an app called HelloTalk, which is a language exchange app. And this is what I used to do in the summer of 2022 when I first got fluent. But nowadays, AI has gotten so good, ChatGPT 5 has come out where you can literally have conversations with ChatGPT 5 and it is actually a good conversation and you can actually be accurate and there's an actual back and forth. And another reason why, in my opinion, this is revolutionary is because for many, many people, the reason why they struggle like having conversations is just because they're embarrassed sometimes there's a lot of friction to speak to a native who you don't know and also messing up. With ChatGPT, it's a robot. It's literally an AI. So there's no embarrassment in messing up or pausing or asking them to explain a verb or a word because it's a robot. And so that automatically makes it so much more frictionless for everyone who wants to learn Spanish that gives us a lot of leverage. And as we know, leverage is what revolutionizes an industry. The more leverage that occurs, the larger improvement happens. And the larger the improvement happen, that's what revolutionizes an industry. And in my opinion, this improvement from the previous, meta, which was to speak on Hello Talk, is a crazy improvement. I wish I had this when I was learning Spanish. Another way that I think AI will completely revolutionize learning Spanish, granted if people actually implement it, is through grammar. Most people find grammar extremely hard and excruciating, and it's because they don't do this. Now, I like to do this through a framework I call the 3Ws. And the 3Ws is a framework I use to learning grammar during the summer of 2022 and before the summer of 2022. And in my opinion, this is the biggest reason why I got fluent so much faster. In any Spanish sentence, there's two parts. There's what the words are and where the words are placed. So for example, if you want to say, how are you in Spanish, it's ¿cómo estás? Everyone has memorized the word ¿cómo and estás, and they've memorized the where the words are placed. So they know that it's not estás como, but it's ¿cómo estás? Okay? And so most people memorize the what and the where, and the problem with that is that it doesn't make sense. And you can see there are 3Ws, what, where, and then why. And this is the important part. Think about ¿cómo estás? Everyone knows the what and the where. But the reason why they struggle with the grammar behind that is because they don't understand the why. And the reason why understanding the why is so crucial is because when you understand why certain things happen in a language, then it makes more sense. And when it makes sense, you remember it better. And it's also more useful. Because it's like, if you were to build a building, would you rather have a blueprint of how the building should look and how it should work? Or would you just wing it and eyeball it? Of course, you'd rather have a blueprint because the blueprint is the logic behind the building. It's the why behind the building. And so people who use blueprints to build buildings will be better at building buildings than people who wing it. Not only because they'll be more consistent and they'll be better at building buildings, but because they understand the why. Let's say someone read the blueprints and they actually learned the blueprint. Then they have so much architectural knowledge that they could now rebuild many, many buildings over and over again because they have the logic. The building in this case is Spanish sentences, and the blueprint is the why behind the language. I think that ChatGPT 5 now, because it has gotten so good at explaining concepts, that you can actually ask ChatGPT for the whys. And you can ask it to simplify it, okay? And so one really important thing about learning Spanish is that the people who move faster than you aren't actually superhuman. Like, I got fluent in Spanish in 120 hours. Every single time I say that, there's always someone who doesn't believe me. And the reason why is because the average time to reach the level that I did takes around about like 600 hours or something. And so according to an AI analysis of my transformation, that means I saved around 200 to 250 hours of studying compared to the average learner. And for example, one of my clients that I had that took my program saved, according to AI, 200 to 350 hours compared to the average learner. And so the reason why we move faster isn't because we actually moved faster. It's not just because me or my client Eduardo are literally just superhuman. It's because of leverage. It's because every one step that we took maybe gave us 30 different outputs. And that is the beauty about understanding the why. Because if you understand a logic, you can repeat that over and over and over again because it applies to many things. And that's why 1 unit of learning logic will get you 30 units of benefit. Whereas when you memorize, it is literally a 1-to-1. You learn 1 word, you only got 1 word, right? And so there are many ways to skin a cat, but you would rather have a sharp knife rather than a dull knife. Why? Because every 1 minute that you use a sharp knife might be equivalent to 20 minutes of using a dull knife. I know it's kind of a gruesome analogy. I don't know why we have the saying of skinning a cat. But okay, let's say we want to cut a piece of wood. You would rather have a sharp axe rather than a dull one. Why? Because 1 really good swing from the sharp axe might be equivalent to 10 swings from the dull axe. Because fundamentally, it's not that the axe is literally getting hit harder. The wood is still getting hit with the same amount of effort. The difference is the sharpness, because fundamentally, each swing is worth more if the axe is sharper. the same concept applies. If every time you learn something, you learn 30 extra things because you learned the logic, just by learning the blueprint like we said, then fundamentally that means you will move faster. Not because you're faster, but because every step you take is larger. You travel further through every step. And AI is so good with this because AI can give you the why behind language. And that is why AI will revolutionize Spanish learning. And so I think the future of AI is just going to get better and better. I think the leverage we're going to get from AI is just going to get better and better. And eventually, AI will be able to literally perfectly imitate natives. And then it will literally be so easy to access natives and get the ability to start speaking one-on-one with natives that learning Spanish is honestly going to be so easy and available to everyone that I'm actually jealous of how easy it is getting now. And so as a thank you for reaching the end of this video, you can check the description to grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet where you'll be able to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words. And this uses the exact point of leverage that I'm talking about. I'll give you like 13 different rules of Spanish and you'll literally unlock 3,000 words. So that, think about the leverage there. You put in 13 units of learning and you get out 3,000 or 4,000 or thousands of words in return. That is super high leverage. So there's no email needed, no need to opt in. You literally just check the description, click the link, and boom, it's yours. Just my thank you for reaching the end of this video. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate if you share this video with someone you think would benefit and like subscribe, like, all that. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed and stay humble.